Searching the web for the most talented, creative, and intriguing independent authors.
The Emit Blackwell Show, diving into the creative minds of sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and paranormal authors. Their fantasy is our reality. Hi, this is Emit Blackwell. I want to thank you all for listening, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. On this episode, we have erotic romance author Sayara St. Clair. We talk about one of her books, Master Me, the challenges facing erotic romance authors, where she pulls her inspiration from, and some of the hidden messages in her books. She has written the Dante's Purgatory series, Book 1, Hurt Me, Heal Me, Book 2, Yearn for You, and Book 3, Master Me. She has also written the Blood Kiss series, which is a paranormal romance. The first book in that installment, Kiss Me, Bite Me. So, without any further ado, let's begin. Author Sayara St. Clair presents Master Me. Trixie Meyer, a club submissive who's tired of being pushed around, has decided she'd rather be on the other end of the whip. She's set her sights on Xavier Adams, the most enigmatic and unapproachable man in the club. Xavier's a regular Mr. Darcy, if Mr. Darcy was covered in tattoos, wore black leather, and was built like a Sherman tank. Xavier has big secrets, and he keeps them behind an impenetrable wall of intimidation. He employs to keep everyone at a healthy distance. Everyone but Trixie. The irresistibly feisty sprite isn't afraid to get all up in his face, in the worst and best ways. He's convinced himself she's far too sweet for the likes of him, just before he starts stalking her. When he discovers Trixie doesn't want to submit to him, but master him instead, Xavier's sure it's the most ridiculous thing he's ever heard. A big, scary guy like him, submitting to what has to be the tiniest mistress known to BDSM kind. Ludicrous. But Trixie packs a lot of woman in a small package, and Xavier's about to learn sometimes the old adage is true. The bigger you are, the harder you fall. Readers are saying, lay all your love on me. Exceptional story. Is now the third story I've read of the Dante's Purgatory series, and like the previous stories, it continues to shock and entertain. Excellent read. Sayara has written a fantastic book. Get your copy of Master Me on Amazon.com. Hi, this is Emit Blackwell, and I am here with Sayara St. Clair, and she's an erotic romance author, and this is the first time we've had somebody like this on the show, and so it's going to be kind of like uncharted territory. And Sayara, how are you doing out there?
I'm great today, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So now you're out in Thailand, right?
Yes, I am.
Wow. And that's the reason why right here in the U.S. it's, almost midnight. What time is it there?
It's almost 11 a.m.
Wow.
Yeah. So I appreciate you staying up so late so I can be speaking at a time where I might make some sense in the morning. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay, because this is like my perfect witching hour. I'm constantly up at this time. So anyhow, let's just kind of jump into some of these questions that I have for you, because now you're in Thailand right now. Where else have you traveled?
Well, I was born in Australia and lived there till I was about in my 30s. And then I've traveled, though, to places like New Zealand, Fiji, Hawaii, places in Europe like Italy, a bit of France, Monaco, Finland, and then more in Asia like Japan, China, Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, places like that.
Wow.
Yeah, so,
that's pretty impressive. Now, as far as, because you're an erotic romance author. What's the difference? Because this is uncharted territory for me. What's the difference between an erotica author and an erotic romance author?
Okay. Well, the similarity between them is that the sex is described in great detail, just like an author would describe, the surroundings or the colours of the sky and the way the leaves are rustling. We do that same thing with the sex, but the difference is that erotica, the focus of the story is the sex. That's the sort of main focus. Mm-hmm. Whereas in erotic romance, it's actually the romance is the focus. So it's the love story. So you're going to get, the backstory. You're going to get this great, all the things that you would normally get in romance, the sexual tension, angst and heartache and the happily ever after, all of that is in erotic romance, whereas in erotica, it's not really a thing. You've got a different focus.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, that's good. Now, so because you've written this type of style, what type of authors do you actually read, or who are your favorite authors?
Okay, funnily, my favorite authors are probably in different genres. My favorite author in the whole wide world would probably be Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
I love Douglas Adams. The humour, he has that sort of particular brand of humour that, I don't know, nobody else does it quite like him. Then people like Anne Rice, because I'm a great sort of paranormal fan. Mm-hmm. So Anne Rice was the first one that I discovered back in my early 20s. And actually it was because of her that I first had the thought, one day I want to write a book myself. I sort of got really hooked into her books. I became very antisocial. I'd just come home, put my bag down and just grab my book. I didn't want to talk, didn't want to go anywhere. And she's got a lot of books and I just read them, one after the other. So she's one of the favourites. People like, back in high school, I discovered people like Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte. Mm-hmm. I read those. I think Jane Eyre's probably the most read book on my bookshelf. I also admire people like J.R. Ward, who does paranormal stuff. Really gritty kind of dialogue. I like the way she has very real, gritty dialogue. It's very believable. And I try to sort of channel a bit of that in my writing. And another one is Cresley Cole. She does mostly paranormal romance, but she also has a series of more erotic romance that's more recent. But yeah, I really admire her world building. And I guess the thing that Cresley Cole taught me, or that I learnt from her, is that because before I read her stuff, I actually said to someone, I love paranormal books, but I'm only interested in vampires, angels and demons. Don't talk to me about mermaids and fairies and, I don't know, wood sprites, whatever. I don't want to know about them. But then I read Cresley Cole, and she's got every creature known to mankind, and then some. There's Valkyries, there's all sorts of shifters, there's hybrids, there's nymphs. They're like the little hookers of the paranormal world. And I love them. They're fantastic. And so what I learnt from that is, if you write well enough, you can basically make people love anything. Someone who doesn't read in that genre, or maybe that's not their particular sort of subcategory, you can make them love it if you do it well enough. So that's kind of a goal of mine, that maybe people who might not read, because I write sort of BDSM romance, that's one of the things I do, they might not be their thing, but if they read it, I want to do it well enough that they will love it.
Yeah, and that's one thing when you write, okay, and you write something, you hope somebody is going to kind of pick up on this new genre they've never touched before. And, honestly, I mean, I've read some of your stuff, and although I'm very shy to read it out loud, it's very good, and you do a good job with building up your characters and things like that. It's all the elements of a normal story It's just a little bit more spice. You know what I'm saying? And and
That's right.
and one thing that really gets me too with the erotic romance, okay? How many times have I seen these thick books sitting at a drugstore or at a convenience store or something? They're sitting on there. They got pictures of Fabio on them. This guy's got hair that goes down to his back. You know,
Yeah.
for one, I'm a jealous guy of that guy in the first place. But the next thing is I sit there and I think to myself, you know what? My grandma used to sit there and read those books every day. What in the world? And then when I get older and I read them and I'm like, what in the world was grandma reading? You know, but then again, you know, grandma and grandpa stayed together for a really long time. So, and you know, when you write stuff like this, yeah, that's the secret, Fabio. But yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is when people start getting turned on to this, they do see the elegance in what you're writing. They see that you're in touch with that portion of the physical nature of what we all experience. So it's not something that I mean, a lot of people, especially some authors, may say, you know, well, erotica or erotic romance is just too much for me, you know. Well, you know, when you're in the heat of the moment, and I'm just trying to speak in general here, when you're in the heat of the moment, things flash through your mind all the time. You're one of those people who can stop and analyze those things and put them down on paper. Not many people can do that, so I commend you for that
Thank
job
you.
well done.
Thank you.
I'm trying so hard not to blush right now, but
I can feel you blushing from
Yeah.
over here.
I know. I'm so glad this is a podcast. But okay, so anyhow, on to the next question that we've got here. In Master Me, which is one of the books that you've written, you flip the traditional roles of BDSM, and you create like this whole new story based around this character, Trixie Meyer, is it?
Yes.
Okay, now she's like a small, petite person, but she has really big dreams about being, you know, taking on this Xavier Adams, who, you know, is a big guy. So what inspired the switching the BDSM roles where Trixie is more the master and Xavier is more the submissive?
The other books I had written were where the male role was the dominant and the female submissive. But what I try to send sometimes different messages in my books. I don't know if people get them all the time, but this one, what I wanted to talk about was that, okay, first of all, I put these two, they sort of polar opposites, these people. You know, she starts off as a club submissive. She's been doing that for a long time, and he's that kind of unapproachable, scary. He's a very scary guy. He scares people just by standing still and, you know, just breathing. He's that kind of guy. He's very sort of contained. Nobody knows much about him. He doesn't speak much. Trixie is exactly the opposite. So what I'm trying to show is that on the outside, you can have people in these sort of roles, and it looks like on the surface they're just never going to work together. But somewhere deep inside, you know, because there's lots of other levels, they can actually gel quite well, but they just have to sort of work to find a way to fit. It's possible, so people can sort of change, what's the word?
It's almost like having that potential. You know, it almost kind of gives that potential of, you know what, it doesn't matter how big your ego is. You could be on the other side of this coin. Anybody could, you know?
Yes.
And that's one thing too. I mean, you talk about in the media nowadays, and they'll talk about gender roles and things like that. And for a long time, they've been talking about this, you know, and like a man does more things now in the home than a woman does. And, you know, you could be on either side of that coin because we all have the potential to be on either side of that coin, you know?
Yeah. I sort of wanted to show that also it's not that he is sort of submits to her only. It's a kind of, they kind of do a bit of switching, if you like, so to make it work for them. So basically the real message is sort of you can actually find somehow you can work together, make your relationship work, even though on the surface it doesn't look like it can. And the other thing that's important is that it doesn't really matter what anybody else thinks about it, particularly in the dominant sort of submissive lifestyle. People tend to sort of have these particular roles, and they tend to want to put people in the categories, and stay in that box. You're there, that's what you are. But it's actually possible to sort of jump out and do something different and go back and forth between, find a way that works for you and not sort of worry about what anybody else thinks about it. And that's not just in that type of relationship, but any relationship, that it's most important that you do what works for you and, not worry about anybody else. Yeah, so that's the kind of big picture type thing.
Yeah, and that's a great way to look at it. I mean, honestly, the depth of reasoning that you have behind this book, somebody may read this on the surface level and say, you know what, this is one of the juiciest, sleaziest things I've ever read in my life. I love it. But if you look at the deeper levels, honestly, most people probably don't. But I'm telling you one thing, you do a good job with that. You really kind of pull out an emotion in people. Normally, it would probably be like a sexual emotion, but in your books, you actually pull them out and say, you know what, there's a deeper level to this. It's all about give and take. It's all about listening. It's all about, treating a relationship as a teamwork type of thing. And that's really good. I mean, I've never really seen it in this type of genre. Granted, I haven't read a lot of these, but I'll tell you one thing, you're doing a good job on that too.
Thank you so much. Thanks. That's very nice to hear.
Oh, no, you're doing all the work. So anyhow, so now with your book promotion, do you market anywhere other than Twitter, or do you kind of rely on that to get your word out there?
Primarily, I focus on Twitter. That's where I spend most of my time. I do Facebook to a lesser extent. Then I have, when you have things like new releases and interesting things happening, you have a little sort of group of author buddies we will sort of announce new releases and exciting things for each other on our blogs, things like that. And then I also do, a very small amount of paid advertising. So I've just chosen 2 sites. One is just only a romance site, and the other one is a general sort of author site. And they do different things. They have different methods, and so I sort of feel that they fit together quite well. I'm sort of covering, a larger area. So that's basically what I do. One thing that I've have a little problem with, and this is advice for anyone who's doing, a new author maybe who's doing erotic romance or erotica. Mm-hmm. If you think that you want to advertise on Facebook or Amazon, then you need to look very carefully at your book covers and your titles, because there's actually quite stringent sexual content policies in those places.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I've come across the problem. I try to make my book covers and the titles suit the content. So I'm trying to sort of, tell people just with the visuals and, a few words what kind of thing this is. However, I cannot advertise my erotic romance on Facebook at all. Mm-hmm. And on Amazon, I can only advertise my paranormal romance book. So that's one thing to be careful of. Is what your book looks like. So you might have to, if you want to advertise, you might have to have a bit more of an innocuous sort of image and a title that's not too sort of obvious. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think
you might not know what it's about, but you can advertise anyway.
Yeah, I think me and everybody else who's listening right now is just like thinking of 50 different things in their brain, like, oh man, that would make such a great title, but yeah, that would be really bad. So,
yeah.
So now, in your experience, what things have you discovered about the publishing industry?
Mm-hmm. Well, I originally was with a publisher, and now I'm doing, indie publishing, self-publishing. So things I've found, I guess, in terms of like maybe sort of giving tips to people who are looking at going with a traditional publisher, I would say one thing I discovered that you should really do before you even think about going with a publisher is do your homework and ask around about this particular publisher. Now, there are places you can have a look online, places like, I think it's called Absolute Right, I think it was, and places like that, they will tell you, there's a lot of sites will tell you if there's something, people know that's sort of maybe a bit dodgy about someone, they will put it there, you can find it. Also, you need to ask people, the best people to ask are the authors who are signed up with that publisher. Somehow you need to approach them and ask them nicely what their opinions are. And most authors are pretty good. They will help you out, if you ask them nicely. So that's the first thing, because it's exciting stuff when a publisher says, we want you. People tend to get quite excited and sometimes jump in a little too early before doing all the homework. Secondly, I would say be very careful if you do decide to go with them, when you're signing a contract, there'll be many clauses that will say something like, if the author doesn't do X, Y, Z, the publisher can terminate the contract. But if you look carefully, you probably will find maybe one clause that will say if the publisher doesn't do what they're supposed to do, then the author they might word it like, can request their rights back. But what you need to do is put, more clauses in there that will protect you. So make it specific. For example, if the publisher doesn't pay the author within this particular time, so many months or what have you, then the author has the right to terminate the contract. Make it specific, make it do as many as you can that will protect you. So that's important, because you can get stuck. And when you get stuck, if things go bad, people can hold on to your rights for a really long time, and then you're sort of just left in limbo. You can't do anything. So that's another thing. And probably another one to watch out for, to be careful of, is when you're looking at the right of first refusal clause. That's a big one. That one is, they might just have a very broad statement, so that once they sign you up for your 3-book series, say, anything you write after that, you will have to give it to them, and they can say, yes, we want this. If they say, no, we don't want it, then you're able to take it and shop it elsewhere. You can give it to someone else. So what you've got to be careful of is not sort of limiting yourself that way. What I did was I changed mine and put in, it's fair enough, I think, because the publisher does a lot of work for you, and it's fair enough for you to give them the rights to that series, that world, those characters, that you've signed up for. But then if I decided to go out and write, I don't know, a sci-fi, I should be able to take that to somebody I feel is more suited to publishing that genre. So that's one thing. Don't get yourself caught up in that, right of first refusal thing, just holus bolus type thing.
Yeah, and that's another thing, too, that people don't see, they kind of overlook, okay? You can take a couple of different steps, and you can either go directly to a publisher and say, I want to publish my book. It doesn't matter if they're a vanity or a traditional publishing company. If they take you on, there's a lot of legalities that you have to deal with. The next thing is you've got agents, right? Agents are kind of serving, and I've said this before, are kind of serving like your lawyer. So when you take your clauses and your contract, would you suggest maybe going to an attorney and saying, hey, can I get some free consultation on just this document?
If you can, yeah, definitely. I got some legal advice for mine. I think you should. If you're not in the business, you don't really know much about it, I would definitely do that, especially the first time. And you get an idea after that of what to look for, what to watch out for. Yes, I would say definitely get some advice, yeah.
So now, when it comes to the pros and cons, okay, about independent publishing, what are some of the pros that you find about independent publishing?
okay, number one, big one, is just that you have total control over your own work. That's the big thing. It's quite freeing to know that you have the final say on every point throughout the process. It's yours. That's the main thing. Let's see, probably that's the main, and I guess the other thing is that the royalties is another thing, that if you do it yourself, you obviously get higher royalties because people aren't taking a portion of that. So that's important. That's the sort of basically the pros. Then on the opposite side, there are things that you have to do as an indie author that, for example, you have to have all these sort of upfront costs. So you have to pay for editing, and if you want to get really good editing, which I suggest, you have to. It's quite a large sum of money, so you've got to put that up. If you can't format your own books, you'll need to pay someone to do that. You've got covers, cover images and cover up, that type of thing. It all sort of adds up. So if you go traditional sort of publishing, you don't have any of that. The publisher will take care of all of that stuff. So that's something to look at. Which way is better for you at the moment? Can you manage to pay for all this upfront stuff as an indie author, or is it better for you to go, with a publisher? And the one other thing that's different that people might not sort of realise is the sheer amount of work being an indie author. It's like, I mean, if you just write a list, you say, oh, well, it's just, a bit of formatting for ebook, format differently for paperback, some covers. It all looks like you can just knock that off really quickly, but every step takes a great deal of effort and time. And, formatting is like the bane of my life, honestly. I just, it always just drives me up the walls.
Yeah, that cursor goes in so many different directions, I'll tell you what. and it's just like, oh, why?
Yeah, weird stuff happens, Emit. I don't know, my document's fine. I upload it to CreateSpace and I'm like, what happened there? Why is that particular asterisk over there? That sort of thing. I've had some problems. So it's, a lot more work involved. Whereas with a publisher, you sort of, once you work with your editor back and forth with the edits, then you hand over that final document and they kind of take care of everything else. But the one other thing after you have your product on the market is you have to decide or find out whether your publisher will do anything for you after that. Will they do any marketing for you? Do they have a marketing plan, or will it just be you doing your tweeting and your social media stuff? And then, you have to sort of look at all those things and make a decision as to what suits you. Yeah.
Now, I got another question here, because when it comes to the formatting and everything and everything that you have to put together in a book, okay, this is one thing, and I'm not sure if you've even thought about this, because independent publishing can be done in a way that it's done, okay, it doesn't go through and it gets reviewed, okay, there's certain standards out there in the mainstream literature arena, okay, the agents and the publishers, they maintain those standards, okay. The downfall about this is the independent industry can also fall off base and actually say, you know what, we can publish whatever we want because we are independent publisher or independent authors. And when it comes down to that, it's almost like every author out there who's listening right now just kind of needs to take a deep breath and say, you know what, my readers deserve a well-edited, well-put-together, well-formatted product from me. And it's almost like we have to take it as like a message that says, hey, you know what? If you're an indie author, do the best you can to put out the best product, because if you don't put out a good product, then that person gets turned off to any indie author. And, this whole independent publishing world that we're in, it can be done very well and it can be done very bad. And it's everybody's responsibility to make sure that's done well so that, those sales keep rising, not just for one person, but for everybody, Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yes, I feel very strongly about that. about putting out a really good product. I think that's a key thing. And when you talk about, like you say, you owe it to your readers, but also you can, I know indie authors who will say, I just don't have the funds to do this. We're talking big money. I don't have the funds. I'll just do it the best that I can. Now, I know this might not be a popular sort of thing to say, but you have to really think hard about whether you should be doing it then because of this, because you can actually do great damage to your brand. You are your brand as an author, and once you do that, it's really very difficult to come back from. It's like, if you had a soft drink manufacturer, say, and they just said, oh, look, we've run out of money, we can't put labels on these babies, we're just going to stick them up there and people can buy them like that. But, people are going to come along and look at it and say, well, that's not good. Everyone else has got labels on. I don't like this product. I don't trust these people. And the thing is that as an author now, when people can just, really look hard at your product, they can go to look inside the book at Amazon, they can read 1, 2, maybe even up to 3 chapters of your book, and you can get a really good sense of what's going on there and the quality of the product. And once, first of all, it's hard to get people to come there. We've got millions of books, millions of people all shouting and waving, hey, come and read my book. So once you get them there to actually look at your book, you don't want to lose them at that point. It's really hard to get them to the first point. Don't lose them then because you've got, some serious issues in your book. You want them to, want to go to the next step and do the one click or whatever. So I think that if they see that it's maybe not up to standard, they will never come back to you. Even if later on, you might have the funds to do a better job, then they're never going to sort of want to come back and look at your stuff. They sort of write you off, and that's a real shame. So I think you should think really hard, about how you're doing it and really focus on putting out a really, really good product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, because you've been writing for a while now, you got a few books out there. Do you have anything new that's coming out on the horizon?
Yeah, I do. It'll be a little while yet, but I'm now writing the second book in my Blood-Kissed series, which is a paranormal romance series. So I've got the second book. Working on it at the moment. The first one was released earlier this year. That's going to be, it's actually a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun writing it. It's kind of mayhem and madness vamp style, just a lot of stuff going on. The first book I sort of introduced the couple and you got to know them really well as a just human couple, it's like a big sort of romance story. And then some things happen and the paranormal element gets introduced, but this one's just going to launch straight into just all this crazy business. And I'm having a lot of fun, yeah. And the other thing too that I like is that it's set in Australia, this series, and I'm having fun with and also the protagonist's best friend is from Northern England, so she's got a particular way of speaking, accent, this sort of thing, and they have a lot of fun together. Their dialogue is sometimes, pretty hilarious. I can use all these funny sort of idioms and, like local sort of language. It's good. I like it.
So now, in general, okay, because, it's great that you got these things on the horizon. You obviously have a great idea about how you want to build your characters and things like that. What advice would you give a brand new author?
Well, let's see. I guess you're talking about like writing or just anything? Because
in general, what would be the one focus that you would focus on if you were a new author? What advice would you give a new author as far as,
Okay, well, first of all, I would say take all the advice that you are given with a grain of salt. There will be people out there who will come at you with all sorts of, writing advice. And I would say some of it's good, pick the eyes out of it. Some of it's, you just can ignore that. The old ones that they keep trotting out, like, I don't know, don't ever use an adverb. Try not to use adjectives. That.
Yeah.
That's,
Nobody listens to those rules anyhow. Come on.
Don't start with a conjunction. All these things. Just ignore most of that. The other thing is, as far as writing goes, okay, you might decide to ask a lot of people for their opinion. You might have whoever, your editors or your beta readers, or friends, whatever. You might ask for their input. Just also take that with a grain of salt, because you have to remember that I suppose writing is like art, just using words as the medium, and everybody's going to interpret it differently. Everybody's going to, no, you can't please everybody, and that you sort of need to remember that you are the person who knows the big picture. Somebody, if you're, say, doing a series, you might have the whole theme in your mind and the feel of it. If you give somebody one book, they might have some advice, but it might not really work with your big grand plan. And if you really believe in what you're doing, then I would say, and you really feel it, then go with your sort of gut, do what feels right for you. You can take on bits of advice, but just remember that you're the person with the plan. So if you really feel it, stick to your guns, Sometimes you can get influenced and go in ways that you didn't really think that you were going to, go, but you might regret that later. So just remember to be strong. You have to actually have a thick skin if you're an author, because you'll have people sort of reviewing, or people sort of critiquing your work and whatever. You need to sort of develop a thick skin, take everything, analyze it, pick what you want, and then stay strong and do what you want to do.
Wow, great advice for somebody who's just starting out. That's a big bunch of information that anybody could take that and use it in their daily writing. So, Sayara, I want to thank you so much for being here on the Emit Blackwell Show. You've really kind of opened up my eyes to this whole erotic romance stuff, okay? And I'm not just talking about the Fabio stuff, okay? Now I'm going to have to go through all my grandma's old books and be like, wait a second, there's got to be something deeper here.
Analyzing the Fabio books, that's great. I can't wait to hear you say.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a whole blog on it or something. But But thank you so much, Sayara, for being here on the Emit Blackwell Show. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. It's really great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
No problem. And this is Emit Blackwell signing out. Keep on reading and keep on writing, my friends.
Searching the web for the most talented, creative, and intriguing independent authors.
The Emit Blackwell Show, diving into the creative minds of sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and paranormal authors. Their fantasy is our reality.